Reform seems more in touch with reality, whereas the Tories are, it's almost like they're just living on cope. It's like they don't want to face reality at all. They just want to live in a very delusional bubble where they see a poll that's giving them an uptick of 3% and they think, oh, that's great. We don't have to do much else now. We've won and everything. And it's like, I think there's going to be quite a big shock after May the 7th.
Chris, it's been a crazy couple of days for yourself. For those who've not seen your YouTube video and not seen your most recent X announcement, what was the news that you gave that kind of shocked the internet?
Well, it's because I've left the Tories. I've been a member of them for just under a decade and decided to jump ship to Reform. It's been a very wild 2 days. I didn't expect my video to get that much traction. I didn't expect Zia, Robert Jenrick, and even Nigel Farage himself to share the video as well. And also Guido Fawkes actually picked it up as well. It's been good. A lot of Reform members have been very welcoming. It's sad to say goodbye to a lot of good Tory members that I've met over the years as well. I think I'm going to remain good friends with most of them. There's only like a small section that have been a bit bitter to me, called me a grifter or any other smears. But most of it's been very good. Yeah. So, it's not really been an easy decision either. It took me several months to really come to this point. Because initially I planned to actually leave after the last Tory conference, but because Kemi's speech on the very last day was good, I thought, you know what, I'll stick around, give it another chance. And then Prime Minister's questions were, she's improving. I thought, this is good. And there seemed to be better party discipline. Then, events over the last week have really nudged me a bit to go to Reform even more. Because it's not so much that I'm Team Jenrick or Team Kemi or anything. I still like them both just as much. It's because, when you have peers, former MPs, and even some current MPs who badmouth Jenrick in the style that they did and smear him as racist or, compare it to Enoch Powell or call him a nutter as Matthew Parris did, I just thought, they're kind of smearing members who agree with him as well. They're kind of revealing what they really thought. So I just thought, that this is becoming my final straw, frankly. And I kind of know that the party doesn't really remove the whip from anyone who says those kind of comments. So I just thought, he's not going to change. And with all the more authentic Conservatives leaving, and to be honest, there's going to be more. There's going to be some big hitters that are going to come. So I just thought, I can't really believe that they're going to leave the ECHR if the more authentic Conservatives are going to leave. And all the other stuff that they're going to promise, I think I'd rather not give them another chance to betray me again, because they've done it several times in the past. I just think, I'm just going to move on and give Reform a chance.
Yeah. It's, I was surprised, but also not that surprised in the sense of, I felt like with both ourselves being more, I want to say actual Conservatives, whereas we've been to many party conferences and often it feels like there's a lot more Lib Dem type of people within the party rather than actual Conservatives. Was that part of your rationale as well of leaving?
Yeah, definitely. Because I do interact a lot with Reform people as well. Most of them are, a good chunk of them are former Tories anyway, so I've known them for some time. I do certainly feel more in line with the way they think and the approach and what they want for Britain. Because sometimes you get a bit fed up of wrestling with your party. Like, you just feel like you have to fight for everything. Look what happened with Brexit. That took a year because Tory MPs were actually fighting against something that they promised to do. So I just thought, I'd rather just go with people I'm more aligned with, in a way. There are some good Tory members left, but, yesterday what shocked me the most was some of the messages and replies from people who I thought were still in the Tory party who left and joined Reform quite a while ago.
Right.
And, these are the people that weren't even on my radar. So if the Tory party losing good, hard-working people who nobody really expected to actually join reform, then I just think, it's in deep trouble. The wider issues, and I, I do like Kemi, and I hope she, all the best of luck, but I don't think she'll fix these issues, certainly not before the next general election. They're just too deep and systematic, and I just think she's going to fight against her own party to fix these issues, and I don't think it will work.
I've heard you, even at the previous conferences and stuff, and something I've always agreed with when you've mentioned so many to me MPs and just members and stuff for you, like they are not conservative MPs or members, like they shouldn't be. In short, what does the party stand for? I mean, has that played also a part? Because often I can speak, maybe the last few years in particular, I felt when going to conference, I didn't go to the last one, and obviously I don't live in the UK anymore, but especially towards the end, I really identify with I'd say half at times of the people that were there, and it was only with people like yourself and maybe a few. It felt we were more in the minority. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I mean, I'm the last conference, it literally did feel like a wake, so you didn't really miss much. It just literally felt like nothing was really happening. It's like the only reason I went was because I couldn't cancel my Airbnb. So I thought, I've got to go, otherwise I'll be wasting my money. So I did go, and it's over time you do realize that you are outnumbered in terms of people you have more in common with. Yeah, there are more liberal types there, and it's like I don't have anything personally against them, but when it comes to radical change that we need for the country, because there are deep issues with the level of immigration, integration as well. We also have the issues of local police forces that are captured by local Islamists, and I just think to myself, I can't really trust the more liberal Tories to speak on these issues, because I know that they won't. There's almost a feeling that when you speak to liberal Tories, they would just prefer to be speaking about the economy because that's safer. They won't feel demonized if they talk about the economy. Whereas if they do talk about immigration, they may think, oh no, I'm going to be alienating people who will never ever even vote for us. They won't talk about the stuff that's more important. And now that Reform have Robert Jenrick, who's very good on these issues, and they soon have more MPs as well that will be very good on these issues. They already have Zia, who's, when I listen to him, I've always thought that he's a good public speaker. I've quite liked him on the BBC Question Time. And they also have Layla as well. I mean, all these people are quite good at speaking on these issues. And Nigel Farage, over the years, he's been very consistent on these stuff as well. So I thought there's more of them that are more trustworthy on issues like immigration. Whereas in the Tory party, it's, you've got a few like Kemi and Nick Timothy and the new Katie Lamb. But it does feel like and Jack Rackling actually, but it does feel like there's a minority that aren't really, they're very outnumbered, and Suella as well. But, and, all of those names, I reckon at least one of them will certainly jump ship. So it'd be less. It might even be less by the time this even goes up. That's how fast the defections are coming. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned some names there with Zia Youssef, Nigel Farage, and others. And we were just talking just before we start this recording about the people who congratulated you from Reform, who sent nice messages right from the top of Farage and everyone else. And do you feel within already your short time with Reform maybe a bit more appreciation, because you have a huge following on X? I don't think there's many conservative thinkers or people who have in the UK that have a much bigger following than you. Do you feel already from the get-go there's been a bit more respect for that in short?
Yeah, certainly, because I know that Reform are more on the ball when it comes to social media. Like, if you look at Nigel Farage's TikTok page, you got Mr. Jack Anderson, who has ran that. You know, he's an absolute guru on TikTok. So they're able to reach out to the younger generation, and he gets like a lot of traction on there. And with Twitter as well, it's Lee Anderson in his tweet said this will be a huge boost to us because it does really help to have a lot of traction on there, and
Yeah.
also it does help to get also media performances as well, where you can even reach a larger audience. And it's not uncommon that my posts end up on Facebook or Instagram into audiences that I wouldn't reach because I'm not on Instagram. So it certainly does help in that aspect. And I've always felt that the Tories were very far behind when it comes to social media. I mean, Robert Jenrick was the best one when he did that video chasing the ticket chasers. That one went very viral. There was a lot of people who were sharing it in WhatsApp groups. I had, even family members who were even on Twitter who were talking about it. So that's how much of a reach he has the ability to have, because he's good at social media. And none of the other Tories have that other reach. You know, the best ones that get traction on social media are Nick Timothy and Kemi. That's great. But then where are the other ones? Because they're almost non-existent. When you look at their Twitter pages, they probably have about 10 likes per post. They don't really know how to even run it that much. They post things at weird times that nobody's going to read anything, like 11:30, or they don't really even use it that much, to be honest with you. I just think it's a missed opportunity. Whereas
Yeah.
Reform, when you look at Twitter, and if you were to just base Britain off Twitter, you would think that Reform were the opposition party because they just dominate social media platforms much better. Whereas
Yeah.
the Conservatives, they have a few good characters, but you wouldn't really even be able to name, anyone outside of the shadow cabinet. In fact, you wouldn't be able to name half the shadow cabinet half the time, except for the people who have been in government previously, like James Cleverly. But other than that, you got other people who, like the Shadow Chancellor, who his name, I constantly have to Google who it is because he just and you would think, because with all the mistakes Rachel Reeves is making, that he would be more punchy. He'd be out there. He'd be not just on Twitter or anything, but in Parliament, in interviews. But it's like we see him probably once a month or something. He's just not really somebody who you see a lot of. Whereas with Reform, that's something else I really like about them that brought me to their way, is they have regular announcements, whether it's for policy or defection or anything, even just fighting the local elections that have been cancelled. It's like they have regular announcements or interviews, because they want to keep themselves in the news media, which is a great thing, because if they do that, then people will warm to them and more people will join Reform.
Yeah.
And I just think, whereas the Conservatives with their announcements, and even when they do make an announcement, it's very poorly designed. They're in front of a very bad background, or it just looks like two people have put it together. There's no oomph to it. There's no major announcement or anything. It's just very boring and bland. Whereas Reform, they put on a large show to get people interested. And at the last one, I believe it was the one where they announced the changes for immigration for people who have indefinite leave for remain. I remember one journalist saying this was probably one of the best announcements they've had in terms of the actual performance and the show that they put on, and also the displays and everything. So I just think, if they're going to make a much bigger effort, then I think I deserve to reward that.
Yeah.
Where you have the Tories who aren't making much of an effort, and what, their attitudes haven't changed, haven't really apologized that much for mistakes they've made in the past. Or if they do, it's like they quickly default back to the position where they just repeat the same things again. Like, for example, they say, oh, we're going to have less state intervention, and then they're back to the banning under 16s for social media that they support. I just think, when push comes to shove, they're just the same, because they didn't really do a great job with the online safety acts. I don't really want them to think, oh, we can just start banning people from social media again for their safety. I just think, no, that's not really what you should be doing. It's the parents should decide if kids can use the internet. Not every child or not every parent is bad. So it'd be best just to leave it to individuals instead of a blanket ban from the government.
And that's what generally Conservatives are supposed to believe in. That's what we believe in. It's not state intervention. It's giving people accountability, responsibility. I definitely want to talk about that going forward. But just to get back in terms of response from the Conservative Party, we obviously have seen, as we just mentioned, the names from Reform referencing you and your move. Have you heard much since that announcement from the Conservative Party since you decided to leave, and also over the years, do you think, like, one of my criticisms, and I think I've said this to you before, is I think it's they don't necessarily reach out to you enough or use your platform enough, considering I think there's maybe 2, 3, 4 MPs who have more followers than you do on social media, and you're you were prior to moving and prior to Reform coming in, you were so active on the Conservative Party, and I've always felt they didn't necessarily use your skills on that remotely enough. Is that fair? And also, as I mentioned earlier, have any Conservatives reached out to you since moving?
Well, yeah, I did have a few that have reached out just to say sorry, to hear that you're going. I say a few were like more, they understand why I'm going, but then the other ones were more brief. So I do think there is a mixed feelings. There's the Tories are sorry that I'm going, whereas Reform are very delighted that I'm on board with them. So I have reached out in that aspect, and over the years, I do agree that it would have been good if they could utilize social media more, because they certainly did have at one point, during 2019, a range of people who were much better at social media. You've got not many left really. You got at the moment Emily Houston is still a Tory member at the moment, so they do have one or two large accounts that are pro-Tory. But other than that, there's not really many at all. And plus, you want people who can do media interviews as well. Yeah. And I don't think they really have many of those people left, because, like I've always said, and I've actually said this to MPs if they were asked for my feedback, that sometimes if you want to win that support, and you got like a Conservative Party that's the brand is toxified and nobody will listen to Tory MPs as much. Sometimes it's better to have somebody with a larger platform who's a Tory member but not a elected politician who doesn't really have anything to do with the last 14 years, who could try and influence people and try and get them back to the party and get them to trust. I did advise that, but again, there's not really much happening in that aspect. As I think, the Tories they're a bit too delighted because they're going up in the polls by 1 or 2 points or 3 maximum. And I just think, that's the error of margin area. And I just think, it's when you look at the local elections that happen in different wards, the Conservatives aren't really picking up any votes. It's still dominated by Reform gains from Labour. You also have the Greens winning the odd one, but generally not many are actually showing any Conservative gains or even Conservative upticks in the polling when you look at the actual results. So I just think to myself, I don't know what they're getting really excited about. It's not enough to keep me as a member. I don't want to stay because they're getting closer to just over 20%. That's, we're still below where we were in the general election. And, I think they're a bit too eager to boast about, Reform has gone down by 1 or 2 polls. Well, actually, like I said, the local elections in different wards are still showing that reform are picking up great results there. And by the looks of it, they're still going to win the local elections in May by a considerable margin. So again, it's one, the reforms just seems more in touch with reality, whereas the Tories are, it's almost like they're just living on cope. It's like they don't want to face reality at all. They just want to live in a very delusional bubble where they, see a poll that's giving them an uptick of 3% and they think, oh, that's great. We can, that's a super. We don't have to do much else now. We've won everything. And it's like, I think there's going to be quite a big shock after May the 7th. And, with Jenrick gone now, I don't really think there's a good replacement, his leader, for the Tories, just in case. Because, of course, they can stay with Kemi if they wish to, if they have bad set of results after May the 7th. But then I think, who would their replacement be? Because the only safe option they would have would be James Cleverly. But the problem is that, I do like him, but he wouldn't be somebody who Reform voters would come back to the party for, because
definitely
he had a big part in the last 14 years of Tory governments, which, some of it in the end had a very toxic results and a lot of betrayal. And since he was a cabinet member and a very, senior one, he did play a role in that. And he's not somebody who would take on Farage well, because Farage has a lot of, charisma, whereas James Cleverly is more of a different version of David Cameron in a way. But he wouldn't be my pick, to be honest with you. Nice guy, but I just wouldn't be my pick in a way. And I can't think of any other name that could replace Kemi in that way. Whereas, with Reform now, with the more defections, if, say, in 10 years' time, Nigel Farage wants to step down, it does seem as though they would have more people available. Like, the obvious one is Robert Jenrick at the moment. And, if they have more MPs or more defections, there certainly would be more options to replace him if that was needed. And I think Reform members do like people like Robert Jenrick. If Suella was to defect, they would obviously like her as well. So it does seem as though the more likeable Conservatives amongst both Tory members and Reform members would be in Reform at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's I don't want to get your take on this, because with the current Conservative Party, have you noticed almost like aside from Robert Jenrick, obviously now he's reformed, but I've just felt, just looking on the outside for the past 2 years or 18 months, that there's been such it just feels so sluggish and slow from everything I've seen from the Conservative Party. There seems no almost life or energy or anything. You look at Reform on the other side, there seems so much energy. And as much as I think the Greens are absolutely crazy, that there's a lot of energy there, it just seems like with the Conservative at the moment, the amount of times where I've listened to Kemi, I'm like, oh, I agree with what she's saying, I like what she's saying, but where's like the oomph, where's the energy? Why is it once a month or whenever I hear your voice, why are you not shouting and screaming about this stuff? And it just feels really, really slow and sluggish. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. I strongly do agree, because obviously not everybody watches Prime Minister's Question Time.
Yeah.
So I just think, there needs to be other occasions, and there's certainly a lot of opportunities, because the government has, is constantly U-turning. It's, it's constantly putting out things where they're selling out Britain. So I do think there needs to be more of an oomph to it. And to be fair, Kemi has good Prime Minister's Question Time. She went to the protest the other day against the Chinese embassy. So I feel like she does do her part in a way. But there's, the rest of the cabinet as well, who don't really do their part to get the oomph, because it is a team effort. And, I think in the last interview I said the same thing. There needs to be more of a team effort, because you kind of forget that most of the shadow cabinet exists sometimes. And I just think, if all of them were to put more energy in, they would absolutely dominate things, and they would get even more attention than Reform. But there just didn't seem to be that oomph to it. And now that, with Robert Jenrick going, that's like most of the energy gone from the shadow cabinet. Like, I mean, I always felt that he did carry it for
Definitely.
almost a year. You know, he did carry it. And, you know, even with the Tory events that I went to, I usually would mainly go if Robert Jenrick was speaking. In fact, most of the invitations I got invited to with special guests was Robert Jenrick. Because, you know, there usually was like a section of MPs who would be at these events. There was Jack Franklin, Nick Timothy, and you get Katie Lamb as well, because I think they have a similar mindset. So, you know, those are the type of Tory MPs that I would be more fond of. Whereas with the other ones, I don't think I've went to an event with them. If I got an email for an invite and I saw the name of a certain MP that I wouldn't have no, you know, I wasn't really that fond of, I just wouldn't go. So I think there's no, you know, oomph to it. Whereas, you know, with Reform, I'm buzzing to go to their events because, you know, I look at them on video, and like with Robert Jenrick the other day in his new work, they looked absolutely fantastic. Like you could see the energy in the video. All the rallies that they put on are absolutely fantastic, and you know their conference. I absolutely can't wait to go to their conference in. I think it will be September or October time. I mean, it'd be much better than the last one I went to, which was a wake for the Tory conference. And if defections carry on, and they get bad local elections, and Kemi, if she has poor ratings, possibly after that, and they have no replacement as leader who they want to change to, or there's just no desire to change, then the next conference is going to be absolutely brutal for them. There's just going to be absolutely nothing at all.
Yeah.
And it was fairly quiet in the last one. Yeah. I mean, they had less business people there as well.
I mean, worrying times for them. How much of an impact was Robert Jenrick for you, seeing him move across to Reform, and how much of a big impact do you think he will have with other maybe Conservatives who have been maybe umming and ahhing to move across to Reform?
I think it would have a big impact, to be honest with you. I know of a lot of Tories that I've spoken to privately who said, you know, over time they said, oh, if somebody like Robert Jenrick or Suella moves to Reform, they would go as well. And you got to remember that 45% of the membership did back him in the last years in the leadership election. And I know everyone has mixed feelings. Like, so, you know, some people will still absolutely love him, which a lot of people do. And then you have some others who will, you know, class him as a Judas, say he's a backstabber and everything. Okay, they've changed their minds. They're free to do so. But I do think there's a lot of people who are rethinking it. I know there are. And, you know, even when you look at some people's tweets, you can just see that they're, you know, quite getting frustrated at the comments that are aimed at Robert Jenrick, because the Conservatives have the habit of trying to smear every Tory MP who defects to Reform. And you just think to myself, okay, like a week ago, you guys absolutely loved him. You were raving about him. You campaigned for him to be leader as well. I just think, you know, now you're trying to say that he wasn't a good minister. And, you know, people who say that Robert Jenrick wasn't an effective shadow cabinet minister, I just strongly disagree, because if you were to ask people to name one, they'd probably name him. He'd certainly be one of the names that would be at the top of the list. And even the Con Home poll, they showed that the most satisfaction for the minister was Robert Jenrick. So he certainly was, you know, liked by a lot of members. And I just don't really like this smearing that they do, this campaign that they have going on. Because, you know, with more defections that are going to come, are they just going to carry on smearing them, or just going to carry on bad-mouthing them? It kind of gives like a vibe that there's a very toxic culture within the party at the top. And that's just off-putting as well.
I think there's a lot of them, MPs or people in the high powers of the Tory party, who just don't seem to have a lot else going for them. Because you look at Jenrick, when even as shadow minister, he was just so visible. Even if you didn't agree with everything or love it, he was so visible. It was hard not to know, hard not to see him. It was, and I think that's a really important thing, that he was just so visible, so active. And I look at the current people. I don't know who's active, who's not. The only time they seem to become active is when they're criticizing, when, like you say, when somebody defects, or when they're criticizing reform, and rather than being like, wow, we should really deeply reflect that we've lost a real conservative, probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular MP right now. This is pretty sad, and maybe we can just say, we're sorry to see you leave. We need to really deeply think about what's going on here, because we don't want to lose talented individuals. But it doesn't seem, that doesn't seem to be happening. And like yourself also leaving, they should be like, oh wow, why have we lost one of the most influential conservative thinkers? Why have we lost them?
I know. I'd hope they would think about these things, particularly with, like you say, about Robert Jenrick and how they, smear them, and they have this thing where they find old posts that Robert Jenrick said this about Zia, or Zia said this about Robert Jenrick, and I just think, okay, when you're a shadow cabinet minister, you're meant to, fight against the other party. So of course you're going to say things, you're going to criticize them or whatever. And I just think they're living in a bit of a bubble, because the general public aren't really going to care about what Robert Jenrick said about Zia, like 6 months ago. Nobody really, cares about that. They're in the same party now. They want the same aims and achievements and everything. And I just think, they just need to move on for that stuff, because nobody really is going to care. And I just think they spend too much time putting on these operations to smear people, instead of thinking to themselves, okay, why have they gone? I mean, they need to ask, regardless of what they think of the situation, where Jenrick, supposedly plotted to go, they should be asking themselves, why was he even thinking about going? Because he's not the only one. There are several MPs who have been in talks with Nigel Farage about going to reform, and some of them are still yet to announce why they're going, and need to ask why. Because I was approached by Lewis at actually Tory conference, fully enough, about joining reform. And at the time, I was, in two minds about it. I thought, I'll give this conference a go, and at the end, if I don't like it, I'm definitely going to leave and join reform. So at the time, I just said, I'll think about it. And, I did, think about it at the time. I came back, and then, things started to pick up a bit for the Tories. So I thought, okay, I'll stay. But like I said, that I'm not the only member who will be approached. They approached councillors. They probably approached Ebony Hewitson as well. They probably have approached other active Tories. I mean, people like myself, I'm pretty much an open book, particularly on Twitter. You could tell how I'm feeling about a particular party or a particular MP. I'm not a hidden book, so that, of course they can sense that I wasn't really that happy with the party. So I do think, they definitely should think about that, because what should worry them the most is the fact that people who I didn't expect to go to reform are also going. It's not just the most right-wing people who are going. You also have, I know a few people who are classed as, moderate centre-right people who have also gone to reform as well. They're not, the wet types or anything. They're just more moderate centre-right people you can work with. So there is a danger that, if all the, nutters they call us, go to reform, then they're just going to be left with boring wet liberals that nobody wants to listen to, nobody wants to vote for and anything. It's just going to be, a very safe party that looks like it's stuck in 2010. Really, it hasn't really moved on. So they need to really think about that, and I think Kemi has a really difficult job at trying to keep people within the party, because the thing about this is, once you start thinking about defecting, you've kind of already put your foot through the door, really, in a way, because it's harder to not think about it, because any little tiny mistake within the party kind of just looks a lot bigger in a way, because you already start to dislike the party. And it does seem as though, with the Tories, like who they put forward in media rounds, it does seem as though they let anyone, even former
Yeah.
MPs, like Robert Buckland, he just had a go at Robert Jenrick, compared him to Enoch Powell, and called him a racist as well. I just think, you know, if I'm already thinking about leaving, if I see that, of course I'm going to think, oh, you know what, that's it, I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
So I think they do need to nip that in the bud. And, you know, this isn't the first time we've complained about it. There's a group of members from a group I'm in who wrote a letter saying, you know, we want you to sort out the peers and MPs and former MPs who constantly undermined our efforts by,
Mm.
you know, saying something is racist or whatever. Like when Robert Jenrick went to Birmingham and said, you know what, there's not many white faces. And I think, you know, in some places that's actually very much
That's
the
true.
case. Some parts of it do look like a slum, unfortunately. And the reaction from like the old guard and some of the more liberal Tories was just absolutely mind blowing. You would have thought they were Labour MPs because that's what they sounded like, you know. Because I absolutely know from being in Birmingham that that's what some parts of it is, you know, is like. And I just think if a Tory MP can't be honest about that, then I just think, what is the point of the Tory party?
Mm.
You may as well just go to Reform, where you can say honest stuff like that, and you won't be reprimanded for it. You know, it's just better for freedom of speech. And I just think, you know, why are the Tories, you know, doing that to one of their own shadow cabinet members? You know, they should be supporting them and saying, you know, he actually has a point. But instead, they just like to throw him on the scrap heap if he says something that they find a bit too, you know, dangerous to support. So we did, you know, write a letter saying, you know, we were sick of them undermining it. In the end, we didn't actually hear back from any of them. So if they're not going to listen to our concerns or even hear us, or they're just going to ignore it, then there's only so much time you can give them.
Yeah. I mean, they surely need when it's the only people I know where when you're losing highly talented people that you don't have an inquisition within yourself. I just anywhere else in any other business or walk of life, if you're losing talent, you're losing people, you're losing your members, you have serious inquisitions within, you have really deep questions within yourself. You don't just start smearing a former employee who's left or a former it's so bizarre. You normally would be like, oh, what's going on, especially when it's happening such a mass scale. You'd have like really serious, it seems really bizarre for them to be doing what they're doing to the MPs that have left, the members that have left. I mean, I think you kind of hinted at that. Do you think with some of the Tory MPs that are still there, some of the ones that were there, pretty much, I think the ones who ousted Boris, got rid of Liz, and do you think there's a lot of those MPs? I don't know what you want to call them, liberal liberal Tories, whatever. They're almost like the deep root of the problems of the party. That there's a group of people there who don't really offer much, don't really have much principles and values. They're just there. And do you think almost there needs to be almost a purging of those people out for them to almost really rebuild?
Definitely, I think there needs to be a purge of about 20 to 30% of the current parliamentary party. Because you know it's just not workable. Because there's certain MPs that I just do not trust when it comes to leaving the ECHR,
Yep.
and there's also people on the prospective candidates list, and particularly people who stood in 2024 election, who I just wouldn't trust to leave the ECHR. And so I know Kemi has his plan that they must all stand on a election campaign and say they're going to leave it. But they also did that with Brexit, and look how that worked out. They, you know, they said, "Oh, we're going to leave it," and then they fought against it. So I do think I can't really trust people like that if they're going to remain in the party, and that's based on you know, previous comments they've made about the ECHR. They said, "Oh, they you know, they did the same thing as Labour. They compared it to, you know, we're going to be like Russia. Do you want that?" And I just think, if you make strong things like that, overnight your position's not really going to change to, oh, I suddenly support leaving it. So I just think, I'd rather not give them another chance to betray me in a way,
Yeah.
because it does seem like there's only so many chances you can give them, and I've given them a lot over the years of
Yeah.
chances, to be honest, because I think the first time I ever thought about leaving the Tory party was in 2022. So after they got rid of Liz Truss, I really did felt like, this is it, I'm going to go. But then I don't know why I stayed with the party. I think it must have been the members in a way, because I think it was just after conference that it happened. So I got on well with the people at conference. I kind of knew that most members were generally on board with, well, the ones that were there at the time with what I was thinking, because a lot of Liz Truss supporters went to conference that year.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a large amount of Rishi ones stayed away. So that was the only thing that really kept me there in a way. And I don't know why I really stayed at that point. And also I think it's because I always thought that, if Rishi goes, then Kemi would be leader. So if it wasn't really for Kemi, but the idea of her being leader, I think I would have left much earlier, because, anyone else didn't really fascinate me for leader at the time. So, in a way, it does feel a bit weird that I've left under Kemi's leadership. It's not something I would ever think of doing in a previous years. It's not something at all, but unfortunately, it's the case, and I don't think it's just because of her at all. I think it's it's the wider issues within the party that I just thought, even when they have a leader that I like, the issues within the party are just the same. Like, I think there just needs to be a purge, and no matter who leads it, if Margaret Thatcher came back from the grave and led the Tory party, if they still have the same makeup as the current ones, then it's just not workable,
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I mean, like, do you also think the one of the reasons you stayed, because I think about this with myself, and I was having this chat with somebody, and I was saying that in my lifetime, there's never been an alternative to somebody who's always going to vote more on the right, or at least a viable alternative. That's my whole life. I'm always going to vote to the right or centre right, whatever you want to call it. And I've never in my lifetime had a serious option of anyone else other than the Conservative Party. Do you think that's played a part as well for one of the reasons you're saying? Because I remember in 2024 we were at a conference together, and previous ones before, and I wouldn't say either of us were necessarily happy with what was going on or happy with the situation with the party, but at those times they never really felt like there was another option. Just knowing your personality, knowing you're not going to go Labour on the left, so it just isn't. Is that fair that there's never really been an alternative or a proper alternative?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair, because many years ago they had UKIP. I mean that did okay, but in the same way, I personally didn't consider voting UKIP at the time. I did prefer the Conservatives at the time as well, because I thought they had a decent record between 2010 and 2015 in terms of benefit cuts and other things that they promised to do, and I did want to have a referendum on the EU, so I thought the best way is just to vote Conservatives at the time. So it did work out then, and then obviously after that UKIP dissolved. Back in 2019 they had the Brexit Party, but I did vote for them in the 2019 May elections for the Euro elections, and that was just purely just to speed up May's resignation. But after that, it was more of a one-issue party at the time, so I voted Conservative again in the 2019 general election. But after that, when things started to go bad for the Conservatives, it was more of a case of abstaining, vote for an independent if there's a good one, or begrudgingly vote Conservative again. But now, over time, we've got a party that it does look very serious, and that's one of the things that may be, more likely to move is because it does look viable. It looks like it actually wants to be in power this time. That's the key
Mm.
difference. It's not. I don't call it a fringe party anymore. I think
Yeah.
they have 7 and growing MPs at the moment. They look like they're ready to form the next government. They have policies out. They have policy announcements. They want media coverage. They've got good people running as well. I mean, even with Labour in London, if I lived in London, I certainly would vote for her. And I just think, in certain areas as well, Reform are more likely to win than the Conservatives now, based on polling, like in Liverpool, Wales, and, even Scotland, they're making better ground as well. So it's not even just England. I just think if you look at the polling, you would think that the Conservatives were the fringe party based on that, and the local election ward ones as well. So it does look like a serious party. I mean, even when um, the BBC performances as well from people like Zia, they do stand out as very well, and they do resonate with the audience as well. They say
Yeah.
things that I would expect the Conservatives to say. They resonate with me as well, and I just think, yeah, this is a serious party in a way, and there's more likable people in there. And then with the defections, it does look like they're bringing on more people with experience, because I know, I mean, I completely understand that people may be a bit squeamish about Zahari moving over because of his record with the COVID vaccines, and he said one thing and then did another. Okay, fair enough, because I felt the same way. But then I think they want to bring him on board because he's got good business experience. And so I think it's that level of thinking that makes me think, this is more serious than it would be for a party like UKIP or another party in the past that's been a fringe party. This one, definitely, it is making more. I think it is making more of an effort to get people like me on board, and it's worked. So I
Yeah.
always felt
Yeah.
the Tories were, I think they just expected me to stay. I don't think they really thought, oh, they're never going to leave. Even though, my posts were very much, became very unhappy in the end, I thought maybe they might, do something if enough people wrote in or made complaints, or if they just looked at, polling results as well. But there was never any major change or anything. So, I just think I'd rather reward a party that's certainly making the effort and looking like they're ready to be the next government.
Have you had much interaction with Reform? I'll ask two parts. Members, firstly, and secondly, with I don't know, MPs, higher powers within Reform, either before your decision or even after.
As I've had a fair amount of interaction with members more, because they're mainly people who were either Tories before or just got to know over Twitter. So if I'm in London, I sometimes would see them at events that I would go to that weren't just Tory events. And so with these people, like I say, I do have a lot in common with them, and I just got to know them over time. They just certainly do feel like there's certainly more of a buzz with them. Like they just seem more like they want me there in a way. Whereas I feel like the Tories are. I mean, I still get on with most Tory members, but I just admit there's a section of them that seemed more, and they seem more angry at people being angry at the fact that the Tories betrayed them, rather than the being angry at the party.
Yeah.
So it's like you kind of just want to distance yourself away from certain types of Tory members in the end. So it is on a social level. It does look like Reform are definitely even just the better choice based on just that. And I do remember when they had, it wasn't the conference, it was I think it was just a rally in Birmingham. And since it was near to where I lived, I just thought, I'll pop along to the after drinks. So I went there, and I've met a crowd of people that I usually know of. There was Alex Armstrong, there's Lee Harris, there's Derek Rice, a fair amount of, familiar faces. So I just went along and just got to know reformers and speak to them, and there's just a lot in common, certainly. And I just thought, it just felt like a more, as I say, a serious party where there's people there who have who can articulate, conservatism well. They have the skills to, present what they're thinking as well. It's certainly not an amateur party. There's certainly a lot of capable people there as well. That's another thing that brought me over as well. I do think these people are capable. I think they're putting the effort in to articulate, their points across. Like, as I say, Layla and Zia have, they've been very good at that. And I just think, besides Kemi and Nick Timothy in the Shadow Cabinet, there isn't really many others who really stand. Like, I can't remember what they've said over the last month. There's just nobody else that really that really stands out as memorable. Whereas with other people from Reform, I can still remember what they said, like from 3 months ago. And I don't think that's me being biased. I just think that's just what the results of what they've done, which they've put the effort in to make sure that you know what they stand for, and it's quite clear. Because decades ago, you could tell which way somebody would vote based on race or class or the amounts of education they had. But nowadays, I just don't know who would vote Conservative. Like, I don't know who their aim is for, or who are they trying to get to vote for them? Because it does seem as though it seems as though they've tried to please people who wouldn't ever vote for Conservative, and then realise they won't ever vote for us, but then other people have gone to Reform that would vote for you. So it's kind of just a bit of a, I don't know, it's just a bit of a mess electorally. Because they've let down so many people in the north by betraying them on immigration, and down the south as well. So, and they lost a fair amount of southern votes because of Brexit, which is naturally going to happen. But so who are they really going to be left with now? It's not really many at all. Whereas Reform have a much wider electoral mission, because they're getting people on board, and it is good to see the kind of wide variety of people who are voting Reform, because when I go to any meet up with any Reform people and any crowds, you do get a good mixture of people from various different backgrounds. It's it's probably ironically one of the most diverse parties in a way, but even though it gets tarred as only white or only upper class or whatever, it's the opposite. I think it's very diverse indeed. And with the Tories, I just don't know who votes for them at all. Like, I can't actually picture a Tory voter at the moment, other than people who are remain Tory members. Yeah. I just don't know who they are at all.
I completely agree with you. I don't know who they're targeting for. Is it just because they've lost their base? They've lost people like yourself who are conservatives in their nature and what they believe in economically, culturally. They've lost all of those people because they don't stand for any of that. Then you've got the more middle ground people who don't really stand for a lot and who probably just go with where the momentum is. So who's left? I mean, unless you're just somebody who just has been with the party forever and only knows that party, and then they just think we're just going to tick Conservative. But that definitely feels like it's changing now. I don't think you have to earn, which I think is actually a really good thing overall. You have to really earn your vote now. You don't just get it given. Same for, as much as again, I keep saying the Greens are absolutely crazy. Even with them, they the Labour have to earn those crazy lefty votes now. They don't just get them by nature. If they want to go that way, they're going to actually have to earn them. And it's really think in some ways is good because you should have to and earn your votes and stuff. So the good thing with this, with the almost destruction of the major two parties is, I hope anyway, where it carries on, where there is this attitude of like, we actually value our members, we value our voters, and we really need to stick together and have some strong core principles. And I want to touch on your thing on the diversity of people in reform. Do you think, or have you seen people that are not, how do I say, it's not just conservative people? So what I mean by that is, I've been really, really, really surprised when I talk to some of my friends in the UK who will have always been more like, they've never voted conservative. In short, I've been really, really surprised that some of them say that they'll vote reform, and some people I thought would never, ever, I'd never think that, and I've been so surprised that that's happened. Have you seen that yourself?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely noticed a fair few people who've just gone from Labour straight to Reform.
Wow.
I think, because obviously with people who vote Labour, there's this often tendency of just thinking, oh, they must be like the metropolitan liberals in London who want higher immigration. But, there are people who just vote Labour out of habit, but they also want immigration to be controlled as well. They want stronger borders. So when they're let down by the Tories and the Labour government about that, by those things, they look elsewhere. And I just think, like with areas like Liverpool, who would, vote largely in Reform in some areas, I just think Reform have never been in government before, so they're not toxified like the brand is with the Tory brand. So they have that going for them. They look like a fresh new party that people will give a chance. So more people from different backgrounds will certainly give them a chance, particularly because they've not betrayed anyone since they've not been in government, so they have that benefit. And people do like I said, with Farage, people do like him. He's a very charismatic guy. As I remember in 2019, I have family members, and one of them who's voted Labour all of her life, voted Conservative for the first time because, well, she wanted to get Brexit done, but also because she liked Boris as well. So when you have a charismatic leader like Nigel Farage, it can cut through. And people will, people do warm to him when they meet him. He's a very energetic guy who you can, definitely like, and especially compared to other ones leaders that we have at the moment, who you wouldn't really want to have a pint with them. Like, you wouldn't want to have a pint with Keir Starmer. You'd probably order a mochaccino, instead of a pint anyway. And, Ed, you got Ed, who's a bit of a clown. So, Nigel Farage does definitely stand out as a more charismatic one who, can cut through to people who wouldn't necessarily vote for other parties. Cutting through to people who are very stubborn with their vote can be very difficult. But I do think Reform have the power to, because if they're, causing people to defect, and we also have there's a former Labour MP who's going to defect soon, and they've also won a fair few Labour councillors as well. So if they have ability to do that, then I certainly can see them cutting through to win votes from people who may be voting for another party for the first time. Because in my own personal experience, I've only ever been in the Tory party. So leaving that and joining Reform, as this is my first time ever doing it, and in the next election will be my first time voting for another party that's not Conservative. Because I don't know why, but for some odd reason I voted Conservative in the 2024 election. I mean, it made no difference because Labour won my local seat anyway, and the Tories, it weren't even close. So I think, in the next one, I definitely look forward to voting Reform in that one. And I think, if somebody like me is doing that, then there's definitely going to be other people from walks of life who will be doing exactly the same thing. So that's another thing that will be troubling for both Labour and the Tories, is they don't really know who will be voting for Reform. They can't rule out anybody from anywhere. So I think that's going to be very difficult for them. And dare I say, I even think the polling for reform is a bit underpriced as well. I think it could be showing a lot higher, particularly if nothing changes with Labour, which it won't, because it's hard to change when you're in power. And I do think when they change leader after, well, they definitely will change leader, but they most likely will after May because of the bad election results. So when they do that and they have a leader that isn't really democratically elected, they will, be under pressure to call an early general election. And if they do, Reform most likely will win it. But then, what will be their message anyway if they go forward with an early general election? What they're going to say, because things will still be in a mess by then. And what will the Tories say as well? Because they won't be ready. I don't think they'll fix the internal issues by then. And who, like I said, I don't know who these people are really aiming for at all. Whereas Reform have a much larger, broader base.
Yeah, definitely, and it's evident with people like yourself moving from Conservative Reform, and as you rightfully mentioned, I'm sure there's going to be more people doing that in the coming days and weeks. Chris, been amazing speaking to you. The usual closing tradition ritual, I ask you for an unpopular opinion you have that you think should be popular. So anything we mentioned during the podcast, something completely random, but yeah, just anything that you think is unpopular. But
anything. What?
Sorry, I forgot to mention it before we started.
I was trying to think of one because I feel like I've posted all of them. And unpopular. I guess mine would be if Reform won, I would like to see ICE-style deportations in the UK. That would be, I'd love to see that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, yeah, that'll be an interesting one. We'll see what the reaction is to in the comments. Chris, amazing speaking to you as always, and speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon.